Okay, I had read that, so sounded really familiar. Okay, I forgot I had gone back to that chart. Okay, Cold War in Europe. The conflicting U.S. and Soviet aims in Eastern Europe led to the Cold War, a conflict between the United States and the Soviet Union, which neither nation directly confronted the other on the battlefield. The Cold War would dominate global affairs and U.S. foreign policy from 1945 until the breakup of the Soviet Union in 1991. So let's see, the Truman Doctrine. This has to do with your study guide question 6. The United States first tried to contain Soviet influence in Greece and Turkey. Britain was financially supporting both nations' resistance in growing communist influence in the region. So what was the Truman Doctrine's main goal? However, Britain's economy had been badly hurt by the war, and formerly wealthy nations could no longer afford to give aid. It asked the United States to take over the responsibility. President Truman accepted the challenge. On March 12, 1947, Truman asked Congress for $400 million in economic and military aid for Greece and Turkey. In a statement that became known as the Truman Doctrine, he declared that it must be the policy of the United States to support free people who are resisting attempted subjugation by armed minorities or by outside pressures. Congress agreed with Truman and decided that the doctrine was essential to keeping Soviet influence from spreading between 1947 and 1950. The United States sent $400 million in aid to Turkey and Greece, greatly reducing the danger of communist takeover in those nations. The Marshall Plan. Like post-war Greece, Western Europe was in chaos. Most of its factories had been bombed or looted. Millions of people were living in refugee camps, while European governments tried to figure out where to resettle them. To make matters worse, the winter of 1946 through 1947 was the bitterest in several centuries. The weather severely damaged crops and froze rivers, cutting off water transportation and causing a fuel shortage. Okay, number 7 on your study guide. In June 1947, Secretary of State George Marshall proposed that the United States provide aid to all European nations that needed it, saying that this move was directed not against any country or doctrine, but against hunger, poverty, desperation, and chaos. The Marshall Plan revived European hopes. Over the next 4 years, 16 countries received some $13 billion in aid. By 1952, Western Europe was flourishing. The Communist Party had lost much of its appeal to voters. Superpower struggle over Germany. As Europe began to get back on its feet, the United States and its allies clashed with the Soviet Union over the issue of German reunification. At the end of the World War II, Germany was divided into 4 zones occupied by the United States, Great Britain, and France in the west, and the Soviet Union in the east. In 1948, Britain, France, and the United States decided to combine their 3 zones into one nation. The western part of Berlin, which had been occupied by the French, British, and Americans, was surrounded by the Soviet-occupied territory. Although the 3 nations had a legal right to unify their zones, they had no written agreement with the Soviets guaranteeing free access to Berlin by road or rail. Stalin saw this loophole as opportunity. If he moved quickly, he might be able to take over the part of Berlin held by the 3 Western powers. In June 1948, Stalin closed all highway and rail routes into West Berlin. As a result, no food or fuel could reach that part of the city. The 2.1 million residents of the city had only enough food to last for approximately 5 weeks. The Berlin Airlift. The resulting situation was dire. In an attempt to break the blockade, American and British officials started the Berlin Airlift to fly food and supplies into West Berlin. For 327 days, planes took off and landed every few minutes around the clock. In 277,000 flights. They brought in 2.3 million tons of supplies, everything from food, fuel, and medicine to Christmas presents that the plane's crews bought with their own money. West Berlin survived because of the airlift. In addition, the mission to aid Berlin boosted American prestige around the world. By May 1949, the Soviet Union realized it was beaten and lifted the blockade. In the same month, the western part of Germany officially became a new nation, the Federal Republic of Germany, also called West Germany. It included West Berlin. A few months later, from its occupation zone, the Soviet Union created the German Democratic Republic called East Germany. It included East Berlin. The Nato Alliance. The Berlin blockade increased Western Europe, fear of Soviet aggression. As a result, 10 Western European nations, Belgium, Denmark, France, Great Britain, Iceland, Italy, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, Norway, and Portugal joined with the United States and Canada on April 4th, 1941 to form a defensive military alliance called the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO. The 12 members of NATO pledged military support to one another in case any member was attacked. This refers to question 8 on your study guide. For the first time in its history, the United States had entered into a military alliance with other nations during peacetime. The Cold War had ended any hope of a return to U.S. isolationism. Greece and Turkey joined NATO in 1952, and West Germany joined in 1955. By then, NATO kept a standing military force of more than 500,000 troops, as well as thousands of planes, tanks, and other equipment. I wanted to remind you to make sure that you're going on the links that are left on the history Google Classroom for your teacher. You can go on Tankerslee's or Lane's. Probably I think Tanks is the one to go to. They've got PowerPoints. If you have Remple, you can go on there too. And additional resources for you. Okay? See you guys soon. Take it easy. Do your work. Okay? Bye.